we're talking about impeccable with your word, there's a caveat here with, what do they say? If you say a lie enough times, it becomes the truth. How many people now have body morphic disorder because they're looking at curated photos of influencers that they think they have to compare to, when we know, Catherine, we know, because technically, legally, we're considered
Completely.
influencers too, that it's all bullshit most of the time, right?
Headlines are changing every hour, emotions are sure running high, and everybody seems certain that their interpretation of the play is the correct one.
People
Yeah,
don't go, oh my God, thank you for sharing your perspective. I never thought about it that way. It doesn't mean that you're conceding that their perspective is right.
completely.
You're just saying, oh, I understand why. Like,
And
I
you're
can understand.
considering their
And
perspective
sometimes you have to be the villain in somebody else's story, even though you're not a villain.
instead of saying, can you explain to me why you think this? Because that can change everything. You know, it's very easy to have integrity when everything's going your way. But when something isn't going your way, it's like everything. That's when you see the true character come out of a person.
Okay. Okay.
Right, a big welcome back, everyone, today to our coffee chat with myself, Catherine Edwards, and Brice from Esoteric Atlanta. And apparently, Shakespeare, everything's up for grabs at the moment, once wrote, all the world's a stage and all the men and women are merely players. And when you look at politics, media, global events lately, quite honestly, I wonder if someone forgot to give the actors a better script. I think everyone who watches our shows really pays attention to what's going on, and it really does, to me, feel like we're sitting in the front row of a very intense global theatre production. And I do not say that lightly, because real people, real lives are being devastated and impacting. And it's a bit like the whole false flag thing. A false flag doesn't mean that real people aren't killed and injured. It just means who we think has done it isn't the real person. You know, headlines are changing every hour, emotions are sure running high, and everybody seems certain that their interpretation of the play is the correct one. So today in our coffee chat, as usual, Brice and I, we're not going to pretend we have the answers. We love these conversations because we're thinking out loud together with you, the listeners, exploring ideas, asking questions, and hopefully creating a space where we can all reflect a bit without the pressure of having to be right. Because so many people, Brice, are reacting so strongly to the global events, and I get it, they're horrific, but we're seeing conversations escalating, friendships break down again, just like we did in COVID. And often, instead of curiosity, we're seeing people attack each other's perspectives rather than trying to understand them. So today we are going to go back to some wisdom that Brice and I actually discussed quite a few years ago now. I'll link the playlist below. A bit of Toltec wisdom from one of my favourite authors. I know it's a bit blurry, Don Miguel Ruiz, and this one is actually the fifth agreement with his son Don Jose Ruiz, but the four agreements is what we're going to be discussing. So Brice, first and foremost, how are you, and are you looking forward to this chat today?
I am, and it's so wild. And just on a funny note, guys, if you go to my channel, we did like a Mystery Monday on the mysteries of who Shakespeare really was. I personally think it was Sir Francis Bacon, but it doesn't. It's the work that's important, right? And yeah, I know Catherine. I studied literature in school, and they always say the reason why we still study Shakespeare. This plays into what we're talking about today. It's not really about the writing, right? Like, it's not really about the eloquent writing. It's because of the stories, and human beings, regardless of whether it's 2026 or the Elizabethan age, we really have not evolved when it comes to our emotions and our
Mm,
humanness, right? Like, Shakespeare is Days of Our Lives. It is what is EastEnders is one of y'all soap operas. It is the soap opera. It's the
yeah,
jealousy, the deceit, and that's why we still study it, because and that's why art transcends cultures, because as human beings we understand the fear, we understand all of these feelings, but it's why yoga is still in play 5,000 years later, because we're still just as confused as we were 5,000 years ago. And it's also funny with the emotions today, before we get into this as well, which I think is really important. I shared a video on it was the guy was so funny. I can't even do it justice, but he was talking about how communism is like the governmental plan that you have to coddle, because if you try to give examples of why it hasn't failed, people say, well, if you just take all those factors out and let it just, there's always excuses as to why it didn't fail. And it's almost like he's like, communism is almost the idea that a 5-year-old has when they figure out there's homeless people, right? It doesn't last because it can't take the pressure. And it's interesting because we know Marxism and communism are very closely linked. And part of Marxism is disagreement, is that they condition people to believe that if you don't fully agree with everything, if someone doesn't fully agree with everything you agree with, that you have to cut them off. That's part of the Marxist regime. So isn't it funny? We're seeing that play out, where when I was a kid, it was just understood that people had different opinions and it was no big deal, right? It was not that big of a deal. And so, but now it's becoming a big deal, and that's intentional. And I think that's why it's so important that we're going to talk about the four agreements to help us who are trying to maintain some sort of grounding, kind of stay within our own alignment as things heat up.
I think that's such a good point. And I think, this is why I wanted to bring this up again today, because it's so important through everything that we're going on that we all keep self-reflecting as well. We're all in different situations. We've all got different pressures on us. Some of you will have loved ones that are involved in various conflicts going on about the world. But when we look at, we're going to start with the first agreement. I'm just going to put my glasses on and read it because it's so important. And then I'll ask you a few questions, Brice. But in the 4 agreements, this is the 5th agreement, but the first one is be impeccable with your word. And a very brief summary is speak with integrity, say only what you mean, avoid using the word to speak against yourself or to gossip about others, use the power of your word in the direction of truth and love. And when you dive deep into this, you'll see that one of the ways that Don Miguel Ruiz and the Toltec wisdom explain it is through the idea that every single one of us sees the world through our own story. And that story is affected by our upbringing, our experiences, our beliefs, our fears, our hopes, and so much recently. If anyone hasn't watched Planet Mind Control by Jason Christoff, watch that, because you'll realize the subliminal programming that we all think happens to everyone else and not us is really real. And when these global events and conflicts unfold, it's so easy for us to all fly off and sort of adopt one attitude where it's so complex. And so often we are seeing things through our own perception, however much open-minded we are. I mean, how do you think, Brice, people can really take some of that advice and apply it practically to what they're feeling and interpreting now, taking the Iran war as an example?
Well, I had two opposing thoughts as you were saying that, reflecting back in like my own life. I will say, as I've gotten older, this is one thing. I know we always like to bitch about our parents, but this is one thing my parents actually did really well with my sister and me. They were always impeccable with their word. If my parents made a promise to my sister and me, they kept their promise. And that's something that Todd and I have talked a lot about, because in my house growing up, like if we asked to do something and my mom would say, or dad would say maybe, usually that meant yes. Very rarely it meant no, because they wanted to, and I realized that created, Maya Angelou, I think, is one that said, like, it's not what you say to people that counts, it's how you make them feel, it's what they remember. And so I've always grown up, because my parents always were impeccable with their word, having vocabulary words for that now. I feel safe with, I know that if I need something, my mother, my sister, that we're going to be there, and there's not going to be any like manipulation. If something needs to be done, it's going to be done. And that is something that unfortunately Todd did not grow up with in his house. And I've seen how that, his parents would kind of manipulate things sometimes, and give things and take it away. And, my parents never did that. And I'm so grateful for that, because it's giving me, I think in that sense, not that they were perfect. Like I said, most times we like to bitch about our childhoods, but it's made me, I feel like as an adult, I'm a hard worker, and I feel like that's something I try to be, is reliable. If I say I'm going to do something for someone, I will do it. Like if I have to have a sub for a class, I will work tooth and nail to make sure I find a person there that's going to be there to, I think, and I thank my parents for that. Now, the
Hmm.
other thing that came into my head when you said that is like, when we're talking about impeccable with your word, there's a caveat here with, what do they say? If you say a lie enough times, it becomes the truth.
I was just talking to a friend. I met one of my really good friends on my dog walk this morning, and we were just talking about that together because some people, we're going to bring in, you and I have discussed Candace Owens quite a lot recently, and she's sort of put out there, I think we discussed it a couple of weeks ago on one of our shows, about does someone like Erica Kirk actually realizing they're lying?
Right.
And there can be lots of reasons for that because some people deliberately tell a lie enough times and think that if you repeat it, it's the truth. And other people are under some form of mind control and they do it. And what's really dangerous is when we've got global, in inverted commas, for those listening, leaders that are not aware of this and not self-reflective, and very importantly, not impeccable with your word. Because I grew up in a time where my parents are saying, we've got a saying in the UK where an Englishman's word is his honor. And
Hmm.
there was a time not that long ago in history where everything was done on your word. And once you weren't impeccable and you got a reputation that your word wasn't trustworthy, then
Right.
that's your whole reputation gone. But nowadays, it's quite shocking how people don't have that level of integrity and they will twist their words deliberately in a manipulative way. I mean, look at what's happening now on a global scale. If you say you're going into a negotiation and then you're not and you lie and do something behind the back, as if anyone's going to step into the negotiating room with you again, that trust is gone.
Right. And it's it's so funny you're saying that too. I was thinking about my dad used to, so my great grandfather, my dad's, what would that be? My dad's more far, speaking of Candace,
Yeah.
his mother's father, the Bennett's, they're a big family down in South Georgia, and very prominent family. And my great grandfather owned a dairy farm. Actually, I found an old glass jar from his. He loved his cows, like
Oh,
very different from the dairies we see now. He actually, when I was born, he named one of his cows after me, which I know that was an honor for him. So there's a
I
cow
love
out
it.
there.
I've got a black sheep named after me and I love
Oh,
it. My
oh,
friend's got a black sheep she named after me. It was
that
such
is
a big honor.
that
Yeah.
is awesome. Well, my great granddaddy Paul, he named one of his cows after me after I was his first great grandchild that was born. But my dad, when he was a little boy, he would go and spend his summers at his grandfather's dairy farm in South Georgia. And, at that point, kids, there wasn't as much regulation. So my dad learned how to like drive a stick shift, like scout out in
Mm.
like at 12. He was driving around the, pastures. But my dad used to say that Paul, my great grandfather Paul, was so integral that he would put every time, and this was in the like what 1960s. I mean, it's very different now. He probably wouldn't do this today. When he would have to go pay his monthly bills, he would actually take my dad in the scouts and show my dad how important it was to walk into the business, write the check, look them in the eye, and shake their hand.
Yeah.
That was very important to him. Now his family was super prominent in that area. Like his dad was a big lawyer, his grandfather was a judge in the area, so everybody knew the Bennetts. But for my grandfather, that our great grandfather, that was important to him to maintain and to show businesses how much he appreciated
Mm.
them doing business with him. So it's kind of that same thing. I love that. Like, you're only as good as your word.
Yeah.
You think about employing people. Like, I wouldn't want to employ people that I didn't. I mean, we've had that situation before where we've hired teachers and we're like, are they going to show up?
Yeah. Oh,
Like,
I've had that situation before and worse. Yeah.
and it needs, I think we need to go back to that. I think back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, there was a lot more kind of in the Western world specifically integrity and all, where there were smaller towns, people were more rural, and so they depended on each other. And when you depend on each other for your survival, you have to make sure that your word is impeccable. And if you've agreed to do something and something comes up where you can't fulfill your
Yeah.
agreement, that you make sure that you either that you put something else in that place because you are honorable. It comes down to that honor. I mean, I remember we had to sign when I was in high school, after every test we took, exam, research paper, we had to write, and I still remember this. on my honor as a Darlington School student, I pledge I have neither given nor received any assistance on this test, exam, paper, whatever. And so I still remember it because they taught honor above everything. Like, you have to have, your word has to count. And it is. I think today people are so engrossed in their own feelings being facts, and feelings aren't facts.
Yeah.
That manipulation becomes rampant.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about what it means, the concept of the story, because if people haven't read the Four Agreements or the Fifth Agreement, they might not make sense of it. And it's basically about, I'll ask you your interpretation in a minute, but basically in the book, it talks about how someone goes into a theatre and they're looking at a film and they're the star of the film, and the first film theatre they go into, they're watching the film through their eyes, so they're seeing everyone, like their mother, their father, their friends, their employer, through their eyes and how they perceive them. And of course it all makes perfect sense. And then they go into the next theatre and they sit down beside someone that's actually the mother, and they start watching the same film, but this time the film is through the mother's eyes, and they're sitting there thinking, hang on a minute, that's not what I meant by this. This isn't how I see my dad. This isn't how I see my relationship with this person. This is not my character. They don't understand me, because the mother's dealing with it through their perception. And if we look at what's going on at the moment, take around, some people think it's liberation. Some people think it's aggression. Some people think it's geopolitical strategy. Some people think it's the next coming of Christ. Some people think it's greater Israel. Some see it as you name it. We could all go on and on. But for them, for each of every one of us, we're so strong in our opinions because to us, that's how we see it. How can people, Brice, learn to use language so that they can build understanding between people rather than just ostracize each other?
Well, I always try to say, we do on our shows anyway because of liability, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And opinions are, and I think okay, this is going to sound really bad, you guys. But y'all know I love my reality TV. I know it's fake, I know it's trash, but it's a way for me to shut my brain off. And we have this reality show called The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, about these Mormon women who had this huge, they're young, TikTok scandal. They were swinging, we'll say YouTube, they were swinging on a playground, but you guys know what we mean by that. And I was actually, before I signed on, I was watching a little clip, and it's so funny that this came up because this might have been staged, but one of the mothers who's divorced, she has these two young kids, and the new guy she's dating, they're in their mid-20s, right? They have all these babies, and he was saying something to her about he doesn't like how she doesn't discipline her children that much, and they're kind of arguing at first, and she's like, well, they're 3, they're 3 years old, this is kind of what happens when they're still babies. But they just he was like, well, I don't like seeing you, being taken, they're kind of bickering back and forth, and then she starts to say how guilty she feels about her marriage falling apart, and how she doesn't want, and in that moment, the guy goes, I've never thought about it that way. Thank you for sharing that with me. Now I can understand why maybe you are a little bit lenient with your kids because you're carrying guilt. And I thank you. And in that moment, I thought, wow, you just don't see that anymore. People don't go, oh my God, thank you for sharing your perspective. I never thought about it that way. It doesn't mean that you're conceding that their perspective is
completely
right. You're just saying, oh, I understand why.
And you're considering their perspective.
Yeah.
Because look at how many things, sorry to interrupt, but look at how many things over the last 6 years you and I have discussed on various shows. And look at how at the start of it, we were discussing things based on one set of information. And then 6 months down the line, once new information's come to light, we're like, oh, we don't think that at all now. So if you're keeping an open mind, as you say, you're not conceding, but you're at least considering and actually listening, not just pretending to listen, because we've all got stuff to learn,
Right. And in that moment, that guy, maybe that girl needs to be stricter with her sons, but he now understands why she has a soft spot, because she's carrying grief and guilt. And to see that perspective changes the way he sees the situation, and I don't think, and I understand there's a funny joke my stepdad used to tell us, because here in the United States, we, obviously most of us have the two parties, a more liberal and a more conservative. For us, the Democrats are the liberals, the Republicans are more of the conservatives. And my stepdad used to joke that if you were a Republican before the age of 25, you didn't have a heart. If you were a Democrat after the age of 25, you didn't have a job.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about that joke now because it does explain it, right? Like that's why we see a lot of these bleeding heart liberals, as we say here in America, they're bleeding hearts for a reason. They've been triggered to feel like they need to be the saviors and save people and all that kind of stuff. And so when you see that from that perspective, that they think they're doing the right thing, you don't judge them as harshly, right? And they're
Yeah.
also, listen, the human brain isn't done developing until your late 20s anyway, right? So
Completely. And I think at the moment, in all seriousness, and this isn't an insult, a lot later, because we're not learning. Children aren't learning, we're not learning, we're bombarded by so many opinions. And I will come back to, I'll put the link below. Anyone who hasn't watched Planet Mind Control by Jason Christoff, it's free to watch, but you have to just pop in your email to do it. Because you will be blown away. However much you think you know about mind control, you'll be blown away by some very simple examples in that. Because our senses, we have evolved, well, whatever you think about evolution, but we evolved to be working with the senses that nature gave us, not to have all this constant electrical input from all the different short screens. And our brains just aren't evolved to cope with that and interpret it. So even though we might think we've got very well thought out opinions, we are still seeing things through our unique experiences of the world. And as we like to say, two things can be true. These are complex things, but the one thing I'm sure of is with the global events going on at the moment, it's very unlikely to be just one of the above. There
right,
will
there could
be
be multiple
multiple.
reasons. And
Yeah,
I mean, I'm sitting there laughing. I'm like, Jesus Christ, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, if you had told me that at 43, I'd be sitting here thinking, yeah, as you're saying that, I personally think we have more land on this planet we don't know
yeah,
about. Like, the lie is so great that I'm like, there might be more, there's probably more land on our planet that we just don't know about, and I think that we have to, everything's nuanced, right?
yeah.
Every single thing is nuanced, and it is, and I agree with you so much. I've been thinking about this a lot this past week specifically, and I'm not, again, two things can be true. Catherine and I both work with the internet. We have
Mm.
websites online, schools online. We there's benefits to being able to have everything at your fingertips. But I feel like, again, I'm going to sound very old saying this, but when I was a kid, I feel like we had recharges, we had resets. We would go to school, then we would come
Absolutely.
home. We all had after school activities, piano lessons, dance, sports practices. We would come home, do our homework, play outside.
Yeah,
We all played outside on our bikes. We knew we came home when the sun set, come home, we would eat dinner, we would take a bath. I remember taking, when I was in the sixth grade, I had to take, that's like 12 years old, we had to take like one Sunday a month, we'd have to go to what they call junior cotillion, which is etiquette school. And I remember learning like how to eat properly, all that kind of stuff. But I remember one of the things they told us with etiquette, and this was way before cell phones, guys. This is when we had
mm.
landlines. That it was impolite to call someone's house after 9 p.m. That you never
Yeah,
call someone's house after 9 p.m. unless it was an emergency, obviously. And that is so, now we just text so much that we don't even
yeah,
think about that. For us, we're on different time zones, and I know that if I text you and you're asleep, you'll get it when you wake up, and vice versa. So it's a little different now. But how nice was that, Catherine? When we had those times as kids, I feel sorry for kids today, where we would go to school, we would learn, and then we would come home and we reset and we
yeah,
played outside and we ate dinner together and we played with our friends and we climbed trees and we
yeah,
rode bikes and we didn't have to worry about, like, when I was a kid, there was no 24-hour news.
yeah.
There was Good Morning America, and then there was like the evening news, and that was it. The rest of the day was soap operas and talk shows, right? Like, but now that we have these 24-hour news cycle, and especially since it's on our phones now too, and we're getting notifications here, notifications there, and these notifications and that notifications, it's so much that we can, even with having the streaming services. Like the other night, Todd and I were trying to watch a documentary on Zoroastrianism that I really wanted to watch. And it was on one of the platforms we had, but you had to pay extra for it. And I was like, damn it. I was like, I kind of wish they would just open Blockbuster back up again. Like, we're paying for all these streaming services and then you had to pay extra. And like, why not just go back to cable and
Yeah,
DVR and blah? Like, it was so much easier back then. And I just, I think we just so bombarded now. I feel like my anxiety has gone up. And I
yeah,
feel like it's because of having I feel like a lot of people's depression has gone up. A lot of people are looking at people's, even if we take like global situations out of it first for a second and just look at our own mental health with our relationship with our bodies. How many people now have body morphic disorder because they're looking at curated photos of influencers that they think they have to compare to, when we know, Catherine, we know, because technically, legally, we're considered
Completely.
influencers too, that it's all bullshit most of the time, right? It's
Yeah,
curated.
completely.
It's
And I
curated.
think it's so worrying because, particularly now, we say now in an age of AI, because for most of us, it's only been very recently that we've all been consciously using AI. But actually, it's been in the background for ages. We know by the time us sort of plebs get it, we know
The
that it's
goyim.
been around for
That's
ages. I
goyim.
was going to use that phrase. I thought I was going to say that. But in all seriousness, it's like, and we think we know everything because we're being bombarded by so much information. But when we're only being bombarded by select information, so I can guarantee that even though Brice and I talk about a lot of the same things, Brice's X feed, Brice's Instagram feed will be very different to mine. And they know, I mean, we know now categorically it's not just what you type it in. They're listening. These devices are all listening to our conversations, whether you think it or not. We have all got silicon chips inside of ourselves. I'm digressing a bit, but when we're making assumptions about what's going on and who's doing what, look at the repetitive language that's being done, because we're seeing, just like we did in COVID, where the same phrases are being used all over. So, for example, and I'm just using some examples, there's 100 I could use, but every news report is talking about the Iranian regime. But what about the Israeli regime?
Yeah.
Suddenly we're trusting that they're using good taking out evil. And you're talking about the Israelis and pedophiles in the USA taking out evil there. Well, what about if both sides are evil? I'm
It's
just
so
putting it out
funny.
there.
And it's so funny because I heard an Iranian say, like, when you're drowning, you'll grab for the first life raft you
Yeah,
see. Like how, and that's the biggest that I'm so happy. I've been following the Iranian thing since January,
yeah.
watching them, like they've been calling for help for a long time. I actually think that we acted to not soon enough. Thousands of people were killed, but I have, you guys know, I have a huge problem with Netanyahu, like huge problem with Netanyahu. I
Mm.
do not trust that man. We have seen him. They have showed us videos. Speaking of mind control, where he is now having um I'm going to watch my words here. He is now encouraging conservative networks to regulate speech, just
Oh,
like we know the.
they're telling Israelis that they've got like 5 years in jail if they show any footage of what's happening to Israel.
I mean,
I mean,
it's
you
yeah,
can't trust it at all. And as a UK person, I don't trust Trump at all.
yeah.
I really don't. I don't trust the timing. I don't trust the game. But it doesn't mean I'm right. But I'm questioning all of it. I'm not going to go back to trying to justify Operation Warp Speed and just be, fool me once. Now, of course, there could be a lot going on behind the scenes, but equally, when the language that you see is so conflicting and doesn't add up so much. So, and you've made a very good point. There will be certain people in Iran, for example, that really want the regime change. But I don't think any of them wanted it by what's happening with the
So
fact that the whole of Tehran is filled with
they
poisoned
begged for
smoke.
it. They've begged for it. There's actually,
Well,
so
you
that's the
seem
clip I'm
different,
getting.
but this
Yeah,
is
they've.
exactly the point, Bryce. You've
Mhm.
seen very different interviews and stuff to what I have. So in your story, the people that you've had have, and some have. And in my story, I've seen a completely different from a huge amount of people that haven't. The whole of, so this is the whole point about the four agreements. I really think everyone should get the four agreements. The fifth agreements is just the four agreements with an extra chapter. So
Yeah,
you might as well get
yeah.
this one. It's quite good. They're all good, whichever you can get. It's a really cheap book, but I think this is exactly the point, is we are seeing it from our own stories. And there's loads of other people in the movie theatre that are watching it from a completely different ones that we're not even aware of.
Yeah,
Hi everyone, it's Catherine here. I want to really quickly share something that's so important to me. I love hosting this podcast because it allows us all to explore those big questions, challenge our programming, and uncover the natural truths that truly empower us. But did you know my real passion's working one-on-one with animals and people, helping you or your animal cut through the noise, find the root cause of imbalances, stress, illnesses, or really just create a personalized plan that actually works for you. So whether you're here for your own healing or you're a dedicated animal guardian, wanting the very best for your dog, cat, horse, any four-legged or scaled or winged companion, I'm here for you both. I work with animals and humans, but I especially love helping the animals thrive. That is my real happy place. So my recharge and reset consultations and online courses are packed with practical tools, printable resources, lifelong access, and the main thing is you'll never feel alone on this journey. And they work. Just head over to my website and check out the testimonials. So if you're really ready to take action and not just listen, head over to catherineedwards.life, that's Catherine with the C and .life at the end, and explore my courses and consults. Or if you want to, book a free 15-minute chat to see if I can help. Because it's really important we stop outsourcing our health, really look after our animal companions better than before, and start leading by example. Now back to the podcast.
I think in America too, because we got a lot of asylum seekers in 1979 that came over here from Iran. So we have a lot of Persian Americans here. They're all very much celebrating. We had a huge celebration here in Atlanta last weekend, I think it was. But you know, it's interesting too. Speaking of like information coming out, we're seeing a lot of young people who are now holding vigils for the Ayatollah Khamenei, saying, well, he wasn't in the Epstein emails. And people are like, that's because everything that Epstein was doing is legal in Iran. He had a 6-year-old wife. Like, so people are in, I think that's how the puppeteers, they take certain information out and give us what we think we're going to cling to. And so it's that, with everything else going on with the Epstein emails, with everything in the world that's going on, it's a lot. It's a lot.
It's a huge amount.
The whole world. I don't trust the Shah either. I'm going to be honest with you guys. Like, they want the Shah. I've shared some of the things that he said because I've liked some of the things that he said, and I thought he made good points. But I'm very distrustful of monarchy. I'm very distrustful of somebody getting rid of one regime and then trusting another monarchy to come in. Like,
well, I'm very distrustful of the Trump regime and Netanyahu regime, thinking that they know what's best for Israel. When you look at most of the, you know, I don't know what you call it, I'll just call them your politicians and our politicians, and everyone in France's politicians and everyone in Australia's politicians, all of our politicians are in the Epstein file. So we can't just simplify it in terms of good against evil.
Right.
Because every single one of us, you made such an important point there. The stuff that's in the Epstein files, and I don't know whether it is or not, you know, a lot of it was legal in Iran, but the whole point is they're both wrong. And the people who are telling Iran that are wrong are the people that are in the Epstein files. So it's very nuanced and very complex. And I think really, really important to keep listening from other people's point of view, because there's no way all of us sitting in our limited exposures can know. And that counts for everyone. And it's very worrying that obviously none of our readers have read this book. I think we should send it.
They have.
So the next one, I think, just really want to, because it will probably tie into whatever you're going to say, is the next agreement. I'll just read that quickly, Brice, and then we can see if it ties in. Don't take anything personally. Nothing others do is because of you. What others say and do is a projection of their own reality, their own dream. When you're immune to the opinions and actions of others, you won't be the victim of needless suffering. Now, of course, that's a huge condensation of what's in there, but isn't that really hard to not take things personally?
I think for people who are very empathic too, I think that's harder for women. I'm not trying to sound, actually it was Andrew Gold who said this with Laura the Insider in one of their episodes. I thought this was fascinating, that a study was done with men and women with empathy. And the study, and I'm paraphrasing what he said, guys, but I thought it was so fascinating. And it ties into like how they're able to brainwash, especially women. And that's what this episode was about anyway, because if you watch this Heretic show, that men and women generally speaking, will have the same amount of empathy. However, generally speaking, if a man and a woman have empathy over somebody, but that person does something really bad, men, their empathy lessens.
Yeah.
Women will still hold on to the empathy though. And that's why Prince Andrew, that's who they were using it with, was Prince Andrew. That a lot of, well, oh, he has mental disorder. Like a lot of women
Yeah.
will be, so that can be a strength for a woman. Like we can be, because we're mothers, like we have that, but we also have to watch that, because he was like, this study was showing that women are less likely to shut down, to shut that empathy down once that person does something bad, whereas men will shut that, like in a general sense, guys. We're not,
Yeah.
individuals are different. And I thought, isn't that fascinating? I'm so glad he actually said that, because that explains me a lot in a lot of situations where my boyfriend is a little bit more he has a little bit more boundaries than I do. But with the assumption thing, speaking of empathy, I think what happens is, especially if you are slightly intuitive, you start to feel things before they actually happen sometimes. And I think that like you feel trouble. What's that from?
Yeah.
Is it? No, it's Mary Poppins wins in the East. Like all of a sudden you start to feel something's about to happen. And I know you even said that about your husband once. I think about this a lot, Catherine, where your husband, I think I'm going to paraphrase the way you said that he is really good about like not having an issue unless an issue is brought forward to him,
Mm.
like letting something go, like just if because you could be just making things up in your head. You could be your
Completely.
worst enemy, like making a mountain out of a molehill. But that is one of the hardest things for me to do, actually, is this one. And I remember when I lived in LA, there was this article that came out. This was like, guys, this was, oh, the conspiracies that are going to start, because I said I lived in LA for a little while. We know, Catherine, I did. I lived in LA right after college, only for like 5 years. But there was an article I read, and I was like in my mid 20s, so I was young. And it was this older lady giving advice to younger generations on how to live a good life. And it kind of, it kind of takes into, don't take anything personally, when she said, what people think of you is none of your business.
Yeah.
And I remember that. And that's something I try to remind myself, like, what people think of me is none of my business, because it goes back to that first one, right? They're seeing things through their own perspective. And
Mm.
sometimes you have to be the villain in somebody else's story, even though you're not a villain. So this one's the hardest one for me. I don't know about you,
It
Catherine.
is. It's really hard, and I think it's really important when you're looking at how you're reacting to global events and how much you're taking it on, is to sort of realize that you've got to take the whole thing about the four agreements or the five agreements is you have to take them all together, because if you realize that you're seeing the world through your own filter and that other people are seeing the world through their filter, that they might not be wrong. You just might not be
Yeah.
seeing the things that they're seeing, and that vice versa. And if you
Well, it
don't
goes
take
that
it
two things can be
personally,
true, right? Two things can be true.
completely,
Yeah.
it's so important, because we're seeing again a lot of people on the global scale, how much are they acting from ego, and how much are they acting, how many leaders do you have that seem to have the ability to say, sorry, I was wrong?
Oh, none of them say that.
you know,
None of them.
Actually, I've got new information, and based on that, I would have made a different decision, and here's what I'm going to do about it. So I think it's so important to realize that when you're talking about the not taking everything personally, is we all accept, toddlers and babies, they cry, they say what they want because they want it from their point of view. But so many of us do this from adults as well. And we think, someone can say something that'd be really true, but because it triggers a sensitivity in us, we think it's a dig at us. So it would be one example, and it could have nothing to do with that, which is really, really important.
What's interesting, Catherine, that kind of brought me. I think it's called, I just looked it up. I think the book is called The Psychopath Next Door. I read a book a long time ago about this exactly, kind of like how like it's like 1 in 20 people are actually psycho, and that doesn't mean they're going to be like serial
Yeah.
killers or something, but they could, but like a lot of CEOs, a lot of presidents and prime ministers, a lot are actually, because they had to do so much to get to where they are. And it's interesting, like putting that to perspective, like I laugh because like no president, no prime minister, no king is ever going to admit when they're wrong, right? They're just not going to do it. They're not going to do that. But if we understand, I think we would put less faith in our politicians if we actually I just think that's, if you haven't read that book, read The Psychopath Next Door. I think
Yeah.
it will give you a different perspective of why it's really important to, like, we have our governor elections coming up, and they're already starting to put, which is, we learned in COVID that that's very important in the United States, that sometimes our governors are more important than the president because they hold the state. And so I've been watching the candidates, and we can really only go by what they're telling us, right?
Yeah.
Because we know they're going to lie about something. So we're whenever we go to the voting booth in whatever country you're in, you're going there with the best of intentions.
Mm.
But you got to always kind of take it with a grain of salt, right? And so I would really highly ask people to get the Psychopath Next Door. I think that's the book where it talks about the neurological breakdown of the brain. And so when you're, if you're somebody that's so hooked to watching the news or hooked to watching these, maybe that will give you a little bit more, like, Republican, Democrats, Labor Party, Tory, whatever, they're all on the same team.
Oh, and I think all the world
No?
leaders are. I mean,
Yeah.
my view at the moment is, we talk about all these regime change, but, people play dirty, gangs play dirty with
Yeah.
each other. There's no honor amongst thieves. And we might think that these countries the leaders aren't in cahoots with people, but in terms of the global agenda, they're all trying to take over the world. They want control of the money, the oil, the resources. So, they're all playing for the same
Yeah.
prize, really. And some of them are playing very, very dirty, and they're probably all playing dirty, but in different ways. And some cultures and personalities do it one way, and others do it other ways. And each of those are going to trigger different things in us. Like for me, when I see someone like you, for me, absolutely, my whole programming for my upbringing is your word means everything.
Hmm.
When you've lost that, you've lost all your dignity.
Yeah.
Be impeccable with your word. And it's interesting, we've both been brought up like that. So when I see someone deliberately lying and scamming someone, that is a massive trigger for me. I don't forgive that,
That's
I
probably,
really don't.
I'm laughing, Catherine, because that's probably why you and I are the poorest of all the
Yes,
YouTubers, because we refuse to play with, once we figure out somebody's lying
yeah,
intentionally. Like, if someone's lying unintentionally, that's forgivable.
yeah,
But if someone's lying to you intentionally, we both are like, I'm not gonna do like that. I can't do
yeah.
that. And so I think that's why I'm laughing. Like,
It is. It's so, yeah.
our parents raised us, to be honest, but they didn't know they were going to raise two YouTubers.
Yeah,
So.
absolutely. And but well, mine still doesn't really know. So the next one then, let's make sure we just get through all the things. Don't make assumptions. This one, oh my goodness, this is so hard. So much conflict comes from people making assumptions, and we assume we know why someone believes something. We assume we know their motives. We so often we don't take the time to and genuinely ask. I mean, we see a lot of debates. I was watching, don't shoot me for it, but I was watching a really, really interesting debate on Piers Morgan, because he had a couple of really interesting guests that
Yeah,
really did know what
yeah.
they were talking about. And so many times when people are making assumptions, you'll see people say, well, you think this because of that. Instead of saying, can you explain to me why you think this? Because that can change everything. But when you get people making assumptions, I'm sure everyone listening here has had family members, friends, partners, people they don't even know very much, make so many assumptions about themselves. I mean, one of my really best friends, said to me the other week, think I told you, no one in the whole world thinks like you do. And I was like, well, actually, a few people do, actually.
Actually, a lot of
Hi,
it.
everyone. She doesn't watch any of my content. So, hi, everyone that does. I'm not saying you all agree with everything I say, but there's a lot of us here that have got
Yeah.
very similar overall views on what's going on in the world. But from her perspective, she wasn't even meaning it rudely. From her perspective, that was true. She thought I was a complete nut job. No one else thought what I did. And, just to put it in perspective, it's recently come out that well over 30% of people in the UK didn't take any COVID vaccines. But that was not publicised. It was publicised that, 90% of people, I don't have the exact figures. So when people think that they, it's a natural human ability, evolution is to want to be part of the bigger tribe for safety. So if all the media outlets are lying to you, not being impeccable, and telling you that everyone else is doing this and you're the odd way out, then the people that don't conform to that get ostracized, because the other side, the bigger herd, are making an assumption that they're a danger, was actually, if people asked the question and sort of said, well, can you explain to me why you think that, rather than just saying you're a conspiracy theorist, what a different world we might be living in.
That is such a great that to say, well, why do you tell me why? I want to know why you believe that. That is
Yeah.
such a great, and it breaks the tension too. Like you're listening to understand instead of listening
Mm,
to respond. And with assumptions, my father is a veterinarian, and he used to always tell my sister and me, one of his first days of vet school, um, the professor was like, Dr. Watson, what do you think? And my dad said, well, I assume. And the professor stopped him and said, assuming is going to get an animal killed. He was
yeah.
like, when you assume, you make an ass out of you and me. Never assume. And so whenever my sister would, I would say assume, my dad would say, if you assume, you're going to make an ass out of you and me. Don't assume. Don't ever assume. Now, of course, in my dad's job, again, that could have his assumptions could have gotten an animal, like he had to be sure
Yeah.
what he was doing, and that's the lesson the professor was teaching him, like right at the beginning of his time at vet school. But yeah, to assume, and it is playing on our triggers, right? Like something that somebody says to me that might be snarky, I might find it funny, but if somebody said the same snarky to somebody else, they might get super offended
Yeah.
because it's our life experiences, you know? And so
I,
to not
I did do that yesterday. I thought I sorry to interrupt, but it ties in perfectly. So I and this, I don't think it will upset our listeners, but don't show it to your friends, guys, because they will hate me. So I sent a really funny joke about that I'd seen this video on the internet about someone who identified as a cat, to a friend, and she found it really funny. But then a younger person that watched it, that everyone in school identifies as something else other than themselves. There's no sense of humour anymore. And I've been sharing a lot on my Instagram stories old British humour, which used to be hysterical because it was so unpolitically correct.
yeah, yeah,
And it didn't used to offend people.
right.
Like, when I know we keep saying when we grow up, how annoying is that? Shows how old I'm getting. But it's so true. It's like every single person had the piss taken out of them for something. And we used to laugh about it. And now everyone is offended about everything, even adults. And I think
Yeah,
we've got to take this. Don't assume that someone's doing it to be cruel. It could be a joke. It could be this. Ask for clarification before you decide. And I've got so many different, so many things that I've realized, oh, I haven't thought of it like that, when someone said, well, this is why I'm doing it. Even dog training. I used to have an opinion about a certain dog trainer, and because I saw one thing of them being cruel to a dog, but then when I understood the context of what I'd seen, it was completely different. I jumped to an assumption based on only a very small segment of the information, which when you saw the whole clip, it was like,
it made
oh,
sense. Yeah.
completely different situation.
Do you know what's so funny, Catherine, the other day? Because I think about it in the comment section sometimes when you leave comments,
Yeah,
text messages, you don't know if the person's being sarcastic or
yeah,
funny or serious. I was watching one of Candace's videos on Erica Kirk, and I commented, I love this for TPUSA. Being sarcastic.
yeah,
I love it's taking them down, right? But then after I wrote that, I was like, I hope to God Candace doesn't
yeah,
think I'm in favor of TPUSA and then I think she's wrong. So I left it up and I put like, thank you for all the work you do, Candace. You're doing. Like I felt like I need to clarify that I'm
yeah,
joking if and that's sad because that's true about like we were kids. I heard somebody around our age area was like, we might need to bring a little bit of bullying back to the
yeah,
schools. Like we might just need to bring a little bit of bullying back because these kids are so sensitive, and you got to have a. We grew up in a world with your mama jokes, and
yeah.
but also in saying that, there was way less like race baiting going on. There
Oh,
was way
way
less.
less, because we all
Nobody,
had something,
yeah.
whether you were ginger, fat,
Mhm.
thin, whatever. I was Mick Jagger lips and bulbous bottom, and now people pay a fortune for that. If you wait long enough, it comes into fashion. But
Right.
in all seriousness, it was,
Yeah.
it's we've got to just start asking better
Mhm.
questions, because when you ask better questions, you can ask a question and then tell them they're being a tosspot. But make
Yes.
sure you're sure that they're being a tosspot first before you tell them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I will say too, guys, I love stand-up comedy, and I feel like stand-up comedy has gotten ruined by the political correctness because
Yeah,
stand-up comedy by nature is not politically correct. And if you watch videos, they show of like woke people coming into the stand-up comedy and how they're trying to ruin it. But you watch the way the comic handles it and the way
yeah,
they're able to like give it back. It gives me hope for some, because I enjoy funny people, like especially in super serious situations. Like
oh, you've got,
I
yeah,
enjoy the humor that people can find in
yeah,
what's even. I watched a funny skit about the mullahs, like keep appointing a new ayatollah because they keep some guy was like, I took a 20-minute nap and woke up three ayatollahs later, like not it, not it, not it.
yeah.
Like I was gonna join, like people are even joking about that and making light of that situation. And that's important because that's one thing I think humanity does do well. We do comedy well, and we are
Yeah,
able to, and that's one of the highest levels of spirituality is to be able to laugh at the ridiculousness of some situations.
not as well as cats though. They do comedy best. If anyone's looked at the Instagram cats videos. So the last one of the four agreements is always do your best. And none of us have got perfect information about any of this global things. We can try and engage thoughtfully rather than reactively. And if you try and do your best and you're acting with integrity and your word means something, you know, there is absolutely nothing wrong. There's only advantage to saying when you've done something wrong. And I've seen lots of discussions, for example, about the bombing of the girls' school. And, quite often the mark of integrity is how you deal with things when things go horribly wrong. It's very easy to have integrity when everything's going your way. But when something isn't going your way, it's like everything. That's when you see the true character come out of a person. And I think trying to do your best. No one's perfect, and every war is catastrophic, and there's always going to be
Yeah.
awful tragedies going on. And that will channel down to other things in life as well. But are you doing your best? Are you really putting the effort in? Even from as simple as, sharing something, have you checked it out before you're spreading outrage? It's such an important one. And I think it's so fundamental to each and every one of us, Brice, to take responsibility for that ourselves. And don't expect other people to do the best when you're not doing it yourself.
Right, and that brings me kind of to something that was interesting that I found looking at, speaking of war, looking at, because you guys know I'm a nerd. I say I love history because I love spying on people, but I was like, you know what? I need to look into this Toltec. I need to look into where this comes from. This because I love yoga philosophy and I love studying where it comes from and watching how it's evolved and why did humans come up with this. And the Toltec civilization that this all comes from, the Four Agreements, has evolved from was from roughly 900 to 1150 AD, and they were a warring community.
Mm.
They were warriors, and I thought that was so interesting, Catherine, because even with the yoga, that the
Mm.
first mention of yoga was the Bhagavad Gita, which was a war. It's in the middle of a
Mm.
war, and how all of this, when life is perfect and easy breezy, we don't contemplate things.
Mm.
And that's kind of the silver lining of a terrible situation is that friction. What's the what is it Rumi says, the wound is where the light shines through.
Mm.
Like when we hit rock bottom as humanity, when we have no choice but to self-reflect, we get these beautiful philosophies that remind us, like these really small, like yoga, like the Four Agreements, like these very small nuggets of how to sustain an integral life are written in a time when there was probably very little integrity going on,
Yeah.
and how we're in that same situation now. And we are seeing, a lot of, the Toltec community, which apparently they mysteriously disappear, which makes me want to look into them even more
Mm.
because that's interesting. Where do they go? Like how do people just disappear? But it's fascinating that these living on a polarized planet, even when things are complicated and rough, like I think we're very it's very hot right now. Granted, the whole 20th century was hot, right? Like World War I, World War II, like Korea,
Exactly.
Vietnam,
It's
like
just trauma, a
it's
trauma over trauma over
over trauma,
trauma.
trauma.
And a bit like, sorry, but a bit like when you're giving birth, it's actually often worse, even though like when I'm giving birth myself, it's often worse for your partner sitting there because they feel helpless. And I think so many of us, hopefully a lot of people who are watching this, hopefully we're not directly involved in what's going on, and yet you feel the pain of what's going on elsewhere, and you're thinking, how can I make sense of it? But just adding to the drama and the fear and the blame and the lies isn't helpful.
Yeah. And just learning how to be that. And that's this thing. I think a lot of us think about like our life path and how are we going to save the world? Well, sometimes you saving the world is helping one person.
Yeah.
Sometimes you saving the world is being a listening ear. If you have an Iranian friend, I have a few that
Mm.
have been very excited, and I've withheld my thoughts about especially Netanyahu because I don't. They can now go hopefully go back and visit there, and so I've just tried to be there for them because it's not about me, it's about them,
Mm.
right? Like, and just kind of remember, that you're not the main character in everybody's
Mm.
story, and sometimes your job is to play the supporting role. And I it's that Michael Jackson "Man in the Mirror" song, like.
Yeah.
So our job isn't to affect. If we all just worked in our communities, that would have a domino effect out into the world. And all of these lessons that have been taught in times of chaos and have mattered, they've been passed down through the generations, they've mattered that much. If these were developed in times of chaos and we're in times of chaos, then maybe we should look back on the elders that wrote this stuff and try to implement their rules to live by. Like, the four agreements, they're not telling you to go out there and like be a protester and do all this
Yeah.
stuff. They're telling you, let's this is all self-reflection. That's all
Mm.
this is self-reflection. And I think that's very, very powerful. I think now is a really good time because we are seeing a great divide. I mean, it's so, we were just chatting before we went filming, like the behavior out of people these days is, I think my grandmothers would both have a hissy fit if they saw how rude people were, how entitled
Unbelievable.
people were. It's wild. And so we're seeing this divide between people who I think are able to process and evolve, and those who are stuck in their own, getting in their own ways by not self-reflecting, by projecting everything outside of them. And so, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
completely. And I think what you said there was so important about a lot of the time, it's not our story. Stop trying to step into the main role because trust me, you don't want to be. And everything we've learned over the last 6 years when we've been talking about this, obviously we're learning it longer, but there's not a single lead character that I would want any bit of their life in. Not at all. Because when you look at it all, I mean, there's not one person I can think of that's on that public stage or being talked about globally where I would want any part in their lives because it's just horrific. Normally,
It's
it's
horrific.
abuse, it's torture, it's brainwashing, it's satanic cults, it's
Yeah.
whatever you could name that you don't want part of. So sometimes being grateful for small mercies and not being grateful to step back and not be the main character is such a gift. And if we're in that position, then we're very lucky. I am also going to link below the series that Brice and I did a few years ago with Jamie Soleil, where we discussed in more detail the four agreements in a series. It was such a fun one to do. And also, I was lucky enough to interview Don Miguel Ruiz's youngest son, Don Jose Ruiz, on my channel. So I'll link that interview because he shares some beautiful wisdom. That was from a few years ago as well. Any
Yeah.
final words from you, Brice?
I think this is going to be so. My final word, I think, too, one thing I'm going to add to the four agreements is don't. I think our differences, how people are different from you, could actually be kind of fun.
Mm.
I went read. They just relaunched the series, Ladies. Guys know I love my reality show, Ladies of London, and I remember the first series, and they follow ladies in London, but it's a group. It's some British-born ladies and some Americans that by chance are living in London. And so it's kind of a reality show, but they're
Never
funny.
heard of it.
They're funny. Well, so a couple of the ladies actually are in the British ladies are actually in the Epstein, but the one of them that's in the emails, I actually really like her because she's so funny. And I went back and rewatched the original, like from 2015, the original series. And of course, the American women they get them to bitch about the British women bitch about the American, and the slight differences in culture. And they're just bitching about each other, bitching. And then finally they like break that fourth wall. And when the English girls go, yeah, those Americans, they're loud. And that's why I love them. They make
Yeah.
it, and I think that gave me goosebumps. So they were so funny. They were dragging each other, but it was funny because they were both right about the things they
Yeah.
were making fun of each other for. but their differences was what made them friends because they got to have fun with each other. And I thought that's like a lesson that we all need today. Like
Yeah.
we can bitch about the woke left, but man, they make good coffee. You know, like
Yeah.
there's we can celebrate these differences. We don't have to be just alike, and that's what this whole cultural appropriation, whatever. We're meant to celebrate each other's cultures and have fun with each other. And so I think if we stop taking things super seriously and
Yeah.
actually enjoyed each other too, on top of it, I think that we would take a lot of power away from the puppeteers of the world.
Good point. Let us know, as always, what you think. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. For those of you, please do interact. Please do let us know your thoughts. And we will be back next week live on Esoteric Atlanta. We'll see you then.
Bye,
Take care,
guys.
everyone. Bye.
What if 20 minutes a day could help you feel steadier on your feet, more flexible, and more confident in your body? At Fusion Body Studio, we are starting a new series for elderly exercise. These are videos that are designed with care, safety, and real-life movement in mind. They aren't intense workouts like our other videos. They're workouts that are focused on improving balance to help prevent falls, strengthening muscles that support your hips and knees, increasing circulation, and keeping your joints moving comfortably. And the best part? You can move at your own pace in the comfort of your own home. A little consistency goes a long way. Stronger legs, better posture, more energy for the things that you love. And it's never too late to build strength. It's never too late to move. Join us today at Fusion Body Studio and use discount code Catherine5 at checkout for 20% off your first 6 months. Your body was made to move, and we're here to help you keep moving safely and confidently.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen. And if you feel inspired, please do share with your friends and family. This helps us spread the word and also helps me encourage some exciting new guests to take part in this podcast. And above all, stay curious and stay free.